So I'm going to show you a variety of synthesizer techniques that are particularly interesting and have a lot of opportunities for specifying parameters, which would be great exercise for mapping controllers or maybe later algorithmic control to your assignment. So I'll walk you through these briefly. Here I've got something you've probably seen before, a frequency modulation synthesis, or FM synthesis. This is like the iconic Yamaha DX7 family of synthesizers, the first mass-produced digital synthesizers that came out in the early 1980s. And so let's see, the guts of it are right here. And the idea with frequency modulation is we've got one oscillator, and that's the one we're going to hear. We call it the carrier oscillator. And it needs to know what frequency to oscillate at. Well, we've got another oscillator that is changing its frequency value. And so modulating means changing. So we're modulating the frequency, changing the frequency of this oscillator. And so with these two oscillators, we get a frequency modulation synthesizer, and we can get a wide variety of timbres just with two oscillators, which is pretty cool. In order to shape this, this is just out of the box, it's ready to give us a sine wave that we're ready to listen to, values between -1 and 1. Those aren't going to be great as frequency values, so we need to do some things. We're going to multiply it by something, so it's going a wider range between than -1 and 1, and then we'll give it an offset. This is the center frequency, or we call it the carrier frequency, and that will send a center frequency around which the frequency value will be going up and down. Okay, so there's a lot that's just unpredictable about a frequency modulation synthesizer, but it gives you some nice controls to play with. I made a little surprise me button up here to pick settings for me. And this synthesizer is going all the time. So we need an amplitude envelope. So here I'm using the function object, and it's nice because it lets me draw in an amplitude envelope and tweak it. Or I can remove points, or I can clear it, start over. And all I have to do is send a bang to this object, and it'll send out the right messages that the line object needs to fade my sound up and down. So here I go. Okay, and so I could make it be really short by changing my amplitude envelope here. And let me just try putting in something manually there. Usually lower values are going to be give you a fuller sound. Okay, and if I remove some of these, I can have a longer sound. If I change this point over in time a little bit, it'll have a more gentle articulation. And then with this value, I can change the duration of the whole note. So if I want it to be very long, there you go. Or if I wanted to use this technique to make it short, that would work too. Or I could just do this with a longer window here, and I'm just wasting the space. Yeah, I can get similar results. Okay, so that's an FM synthesis, and it has a place where it needs a trigger to trigger a note. It needs a place where we can set the duration of a note, and we've got these values that these need numbers, and pretty much any number works. Maybe explore with the surprise me feature and find some settings that you like. Also keep in mind, if we look at a traditional amplitude envelope where we define an attack, a decay where it comes down a little bit, sustain and release, you could formulate a message so that you have each of these parameters controlled separately by max. So let's see, I might want to, and I can use an object called pack for this. It allows me to pack a set of different numbers or values together into a list, and that's the list that we can send line. So for example, let's say We want to go to 1 over pretty fast, say 50 milliseconds. And then we'll dial it back a bit and go to 0.4 over 200 milliseconds. And we'll say, okay, what's our sustain? Well, sustain usually stays at the same volume for a certain amount of time. So we'll say stay at 0.4 and stay there for, let's see, a second and a half. And then you can let go of the note. And so finally go to 0 over, we'll say, a second. Okay, so I could have numbers coming into each of these things. One thing that I need to do differently for the first inlet is use a message box that has the set message in here, and it puts the word set before it. That way, let's see. No, we'll just see a bang. If I were to just put a number in here, it's going to send out that list every time a number comes in. Here, this lets me set the number, and then when it's time to play a note, I can bang this pack object, and it'll send it out. So I can map controls to each of these elements in my amplitude envelope. So let's see, I'll say how loud. Well, let's see. Maybe I want to just deal with time anyway. So I'll say, yeah, go to 1, go up to full volume, and second element, take this long to get there. There's my attack, and then for the decay, take that long to get to the decay, and maybe I could set that decay value where it lands if I like. This will be how long it will sustain, and how long the release period will be. And I'll use that initialism. And so that can connect up to my line object here. And there, if I bang this, if I make a quicker attack or a longer attack, I can make it sustain not very long. Okay, so that's frequency modulation synthesis, and those are the controls waiting for your external control, or maybe in the future an algorithm you've created to make these musical decisions for you. Next, I've got a type of physical modeling synthesis. This is where we're doing a process in a digital form that mimics what's happening in physics of a musical instrument. And this particular technique developed by Karpless and Strong, we call Karpless Strong synthesis, is great for modeling a plucked string. Now, you'll notice it sounds familiar, and it also looks familiar. See, we've got at the heart of it is a delay with a feedback loop. Well, there's some extra stuff in there, but this is at its heart a comb filter, which is made out of a delay with a very short delay period and very high feedback amount. And so here, with all its default settings, I'll just bang to here. This is going to pick a new note and then also pluck it. Otherwise, I could set a frequency here and pluck it, but I'll just do this at first. And so if I want to control the frequency, I'll map something to this control probably and set it to, say, 200 hertz. And you can get a nice, pretty rich sound. And the really exciting thing about physical modeling synthesis approaches is that it's getting subtle variations on the sound, much like what happens in the physical world, that would be very difficult to specify this way with just specifying those parameters. So listen as I hit the same note multiple times, and each one sounds just a little bit different. Okay, so that'll give you a pretty rewarding instrument to play with. So this is really connected to the feedback control in my of my digital delay.
So it goes between 0 and 1, but this is the resonance. If I have a very low amount of resonance in my instrument, I get a very short note. So most of the time I'm going to want a very, very high, but not quite 1 resonance value. Okay, so I can play with that. But there's some other things here. We've got a filter in place so we can do damping. So here I've got a biquad tilde doing the biquadratic filter, and it's acting as a high shelving filter. It's in this feedback loop. So it's going to be lowering the high frequencies with each pass. So let's see what this sounds like. And this is between 0 and 1. What if I bring it all the way to 0? This is how much it's attenuating. Ooh, that was a lot. Let me dial it back. Okay. Get a darker sound. If I open it all the way up, I get a very bright sound. So if you were, say, maybe palm muting a string, maybe I might get a value around there, something like that. Your palm in this case would be muting the string, absorbing the high frequencies and letting the low frequencies come through. Something like that. And then I can also change the frequency at which the frequency at where the roll-off starts. Okay. Then if you're a string player, you'll also know that it matters where you put where you pluck, or if you're bowing, where you would bow on the string. And so the ends of the string are just defined as 0 and 1. And the default value we can see in there was 0.25. That's happening over here with these two delays that happen before we get into our delay loop. You see, when you pluck a string, it's actually introducing a burst of noise. Here's our noise generator. Here's a little short amplitude envelope that'll make it a burst of noise. And first, that burst of noise goes down the string toward the bridge and up the string toward the nut, or up and then down, depending on which way you think is up. And then they start bouncing back and forth between the nut and the bridge. And so this is the bouncing back and forth portion. This is a portion right after the first pluck. And so it's dividing the string up. So here's at that position. If we get at, say, the bridge, we get a different sound. And in the middle, so we get, these are subtle changes, but this is another aspect of the sound that you may want to play with. One more thing. Did you notice that we're introducing a burst of noise in here? That's our pick. We're not just banging it saying fade this sound up because it's always happening, like with the FM synthesizer. This is fading in a noise. We need a sound. So we could fade in any other kind of sound. And so, for example, here's these are some of the default sounds that come with Macs. This is the string quartet sound. You can hear it ringing through this string. Here's a Cherokee chant. And so then things can get really interesting. You can use this resonating string as a sound processor for some other sound that you put into it. And so there's some great possibilities there. Okay, another type of something related to physical modeling synthesis is a resonant filter bank. I say it's related because it gets similar results where each time you strike a note, it's has very natural variations in the sound, but it's harder to see the connection between the mathematical process going on here and the physical process. That's all. But what we're doing here is we've got a 50 resonant bandpass filters all in one object here, and you could actually send them different places. I've got them all connected here for you into one object for convenience.
And so each of them need frequency values, Q or bandwidth values, and gain values. And in this particular setting, we're going to use this object called a multi-slider, and we can set all of these things. This is like 50 little faders all at once. And we can set our Qs the same way. Maybe we want them like that. Maybe we'll make the ones in the middle a little higher. And here I've got gain set as a function of the Q, because the higher the Q, the narrower the bandwidth, which means the quieter it gets, so we want more gain. But if we lower the Q, we want to lower the gain as well. And so this keeps it in a hopefully useful relationship. If you want to change these controllers yourself or start with a more neutral set, you can open up the help patcher. And I just stole these out of here. See, orange. Just like this one. I copied that first one and then duplicated it. Okay, so to play this one, it's a resonant filter bank. So they're going to filter a sound. We need to play a sound into it. And then they're going to resonate. So here's the same plucking code that I used in the Karpless Strong. And here I can bang it. Oh, that's not very interesting. So let me try some presets. Okay, very low frequencies, very low Q, which means wide bandwidth. Oh. Well, it's a subtle thing, but you hear how it kind of sounds like a wooden box? So I can make a different wooden box. Okay, let's try another preset. This is mostly low frequencies with some half of them going up halfway, and Q's about halfway up the scale. Oh, maybe that sounds more like the drum of the head of a drum. And so I can make a different drum, a brighter drum, one that rings more, or maybe it rings in certain places but not others. The lower Q is, the more noisy it's going to be, kind of a sound. The higher Q is, the more ringy it will be. All right, here's yet a different one. Cool. Now, I put this control up here to give a different scale to our Q settings. So this is going to be extra ringy kinds of sounds, and they'll sound more metallic, whereas before it seemed like we were kind of dealing with a wooden object or a skin stretched on a drum. Oh. Okay, and I've got some space up here so you can store your own presets. Okay, so some ideas down here. You'll need to make sure you change values for each of these things so that you avoid clipping for full credit on your assignments. So that make sure that it doesn't get so loud that it chops off the tops and the bottoms of the notes, starts to sound fuzzy, distorted, overdriven, saturated, all that. Different words for the same thing. But these two things put together, here we've modeled a plucked string, and that's part of a guitar, but it's not all of a guitar, right? There's still for an acoustic guitar, there's a resonating body there. Well, we could use this to mimic the resonating body, and so we could run our string sound in here to through this body. We'll make it a little bit ringier. And then we'll probably want to control the, well, let's listen just to the string through the body. Okay, kind of sounds like we're inside the body of a guitar. Really we'll want to control the balance between these two, because you can hear the raw string directly in addition to how it resonates in the body. I'm gonna try a little more here. Okay, so now you can hear, we'll give it a little bit more realistic attenuation. And it starts to sound like a viable physical object. Okay, let me reset this. And then you could also use something like this to make a pick sound for your string. So I'll put this in this inlet, and that tiny little wood pat sound, or maybe the drum sound. What happens when you play a guitar with a triangle? Ooh. You can get some nice hybrids between these two sounds. Okay, so there you go. There's a can of worms of things for you to explore. And these are all instruments that need numbers set to them. Here, you can either send a lot of numbers by packing all these numbers together, or you can set presets and control them, or you simply use buttons to trigger one or the other. Bang the gong, bang the triangle. Here are all these parameters that you can map things to. And also with the frequency modulation synthesis, don't forget you can have volume controls for things. You might automate some of these things in rudimentary ways and have a turn a metro on and off and map a control so that you can control its speed and have that randomly pick new notes. So maybe I'm not doing any of this directly, but I've got controls that control the controls. Okay. So there you go. It's not required that you use these. They're just there to better equip you to have some ideas to complete the assignment however you like. Have fun.